In fighting games, there are currently two main types of inputs. Motion inputs, sometimes referred to as classic inputs, are the ones that most people are familiar with. Buttons relate to normal attacks, special moves require you to do a motion input, and supers generally require a more complex motion, or multiple button presses, in order to execute them. You know, the things you put on shirts to appeal to the retro gamers. However, in recent years, there has been an increase in a different form of inputs. Generally known as simple inputs, these aim to remove motion inputs almost in their entirety, as well as sometimes moving some buttons around, and have you execute special moves with just a single direction and a button press. Some games still allow you to choose the strength of the special move by pressing two different buttons with a direction, but some other games just don't have that option. In the past few years, the amount of games that use simple inputs have been on the rise. Obviously, now we have Grand Blue and Street Fighter 6, but with the incoming wave of tag games, we are set to have 3 more games with simple inputs. With 2XQO and Marvel Tokon both having simple inputs, and Invincible Versus originally being designed entirely with them. With simple inputs on the rise, it's normal for fighting game-centric folk like myself to ask a pretty simple question. Is this the future? Is every fighting game going to get rid of motion inputs in favor of simple one-direction button attacks? Am I doomed to never do a DP motion again? Well, to answer that question, I think we need to look at why this is happening, what the benefits and drawbacks of simple inputs are, and a possible alternative path to tackling the problem at the core of fighting games. So, let's talk about if modern controls are inevitable. Before we get into the real meat of this topic, I think it's worth taking a little bit of time to actually look at modern controls. With a lot of these kind of videos, it's very easy for people to dismiss modern and simple inputs as stupid and dumb and stupid. However, I believe there's actually quite a few good things about modern controls, and I don't just want to write them off entirely. If you are a modern control enjoyer, I want you to know that I still think you're valid, and you are allowed in this community. These things have been added for a reason, and there's actually some good things about them. So let's start with the main benefit. When you press the button in modern controls, the thing that you want happens. I know. Shocker. One of the bigger problems with classic inputs for a lot of fighting game players is that sometimes you drop your inputs. In a very intense set, or even just the heat of a moment, sometimes you drop motion inputs and it feels kinda shit. There's nothing worse than trying to do a DP and getting a fireball. Or worse yet, trying to do a fireball and somehow getting a super. When you're jumping around between games that have completely different buffers, sometimes when you're used to one and you go to another, you'll get moves that you don't exactly want and it'll feel like crap. Simple inputs completely removes this problem. You press the direction, you press the button, you get the move that you want. This is really good for newer players who are learning the game, veterans who might not necessarily understand how the input buffer of this game works, or, most importantly, people with motor function problems. There's a large subset of people who just can't play fighting games because, well, they can't. It's not the standard straw man argument of the guy arguing in the Twitter comment section about how motion inputs are too hard and gatekeepy. It's people who literally can't physically execute them. I had a friend a while ago who had surgery when she was very young, and because of that, her left hand just didn't work in the way that she expected it to. She described it as a literal form of lag on her left hand. So doing motion inputs for her was not easy. She could still technically do them, but there was a larger hurdle to overcome. Simple inputs, on the other hand, were really convenient for her. I think a lot of the demonizing of modern controls ends up backlashing the people who really need it the most. Yes, there can be problems with it, and we'll get on to it later, but on their own, they're not a bad decision. If a fighting game comes out and it uses nothing but modern controls, that's completely fine. And I would never say that a fighting game is bad just because it uses modern controls. Hell, the character I play in Strive is basically a modern control character. It's also just easier to learn. When you're learning something, you can generally only keep 3 different blocks of information in your head at one time. Once you commit it to memory, it's a lot easier to redraw that back out, and if you can find ways to condense bits of information, that's also a lot easier. But when you first start playing fighting games, you're figuring about what your characters do, what your normals do, and how to use your motion inputs. And then on top of that, you have an opponent that you need to deal with. It could be a bit of a mental burden. So a lot of newer players like using modern controls because it's simply a block of information they don't have to worry about as much. But I don't want to say that they're perfect, at least in their current iteration. While I think modern controls aren't necessarily a bad thing, they do have benefits and drawbacks that they bring with different fighting games. The most talked about one, and the one that you're probably thinking of right now, is the fact that modern controls can generally impact how a character is designed. I'm no Street Fighter player, so I can't comment on that here. However, in Grand Blue, the design of characters is heavily impacted by the simple input scheme. The majority of characters within Grand Blue only have 4 special moves, and that's because there's only 4 different simple inputs you can do on the single simple input button. They have definitely found ways to get around this and make more interesting kits. See my videos on 2B or Sandy in order to understand what I'm talking about, but for the majority of the cast, you get 4 special moves, and that's it. For some archetypes, that's completely fine. Shotos work pretty well. However, your more complicated characters have to find innovative ways to work within this system. Limitations generally do breed innovation, however, sometimes they are so limiting that you can't really get them to work. I know there's some controversy with Sagat in Street Fighter 6, and people are pretty sure that modern controls influenced how his kit is. I don't play Street Fighter 6 though, so you're gonna have to go and watch Brian F for that one. Your moves also need to be designed around the fact that they are now simple inputs. A lot of games that have simple inputs generally refuse to have invincible reversals because the logic is having it on a single button press is way too strong. Now, I do see the logic here. However, the games that people are generally talking about are Street Fighter. And if you don't know, Street Fighter 5 and 6 have very lenient input buffers where you can actually do a DP in like 2 frames. Shaving a single frame off of that doesn't really change too much. And if you're doing DPs and block strings and on wake up, you can generally buffer them enough so that you get them out immediately anyway. Personally, if I was a game designer and I was making a game with modern controls, I'd try 1 button invincible reversals. I mean, they did it in BB Tag and, well, we all know how that went. But I don't think this is as big of an issue as some people say. Though that doesn't mean that they don't affect the gameplay in other ways. And of course, the big one. If you spent time learning motion inputs, you probably like doing motion inputs now. Motion inputs give a specific hand feel to the characters. Every character that you play in a fighting game feels different to control. The timing of their combos, the motion inputs that you have to do, the more technical inputs that you have to bring out. The way that your character feels in your hand can be very important for some players, and it's sometimes why when a new game comes out, people don't play the same characters, because they feel different. If you've ever put any time into Central Fiction and you've tried BB Tag, you know this phenomenon. I don't think this is the real core of the issue. These are knock-on effects after they are added, and they can be seen as design challenges to be overcome. We need to get to the meat of the issue. Why are modern controls being put in seemingly every fighting game? Well, let's go back to the Twitter straw man, shall we? If you ask someone who doesn't play a lot of fighting games why they don't get into them, the general answer that they can give is that fighting games require a lot of motion inputs and have a high barrier to entry. It's either combos, motion inputs, or feeling like shit when they lose. Generally, a mix of all the 3. People don't want to go into a game and literally see themselves get beaten up for several minutes. So they find a boogeyman to blame and blame it on it. There's also nothing more infuriating than seeing something cool, wanting to do the thing, and not being able to do it easily. Shooters had this problem quite a while ago, where there was really cool and interesting mechanics in some older shooters, and more people wanted to do them. So developers started adding them as abilities and passives. But I get it. I don't want this to sound like it is a bad thing, because I have been there. Not just in fighting games, but in other games in general. There is nothing worse than playing something and knowing what you need to do in order to win, and not being able to do it. Recently, I had a friend staying with me, and we went to a fighting game local. I was watching them play Ramlethal for the first time since Season 1 against someone else at the local. I saw they had a 100 meter, which generally, in Guilty Gear, when you have a 100 meter, you can reversal super and RC to make yourself safe. So I told them, calmly, Moto Battle, now! And you could see that they tried to do it and failed. And they did not seem happy about it. I think this is the core of the issue. Losing because you failed to input something feels terrible, and it can disincentivize a lot of people from joining these games. But why are people so unfamiliar with them? Like, there's a general level of gaming knowledge that a lot of people have about a lot of different things. Anytime this argument comes up, I hear people constantly say, everybody knows how to play a shooter. I'm so sick of that fucking everyone knows how to play a shooter. Shut up. So if people know how to play a shooter, why don't they necessarily know how to play a fighting game? Well, looking at shooters as a genre, it is massive and far-reaching with a bunch of subgenres within it. Some of these are highly competitive multiplayer games. Some of these are casual-focused multiplayer games. Some of them are kind of hard single-player games, and some of them are just shoot the bad guy infestations. Whatever you feel like you want to do, somewhere on the spectrum you will find a shooter game that is good for you. That's not even considering all of the weirdo ones that are out there. Fighting games, while having very interesting subgenres, generally all fall into the multiplayer competitive side of the spectrum. Sure, some platform fighters definitely have casual modes, and basically every fighting game has a single-player mode, but there's no casual single-player fighting games. But there was a type very long ago. I talked about this a little bit before in a video like a month ago, but fighting games didn't just spawn into existence. There was a genre before it that it spun off of. Of course, talking about the beat-em-up. Games like Double Dragon, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle games, the Simpsons video game, all of these were massive cultural icons for a time. So at the time that fighting games came out, they were a nice spin on the already established formula of beating the shit out of guys. However, the beat 'em up has pretty much died. Like, Castle Crashers is still around, and there's that new Scott Pilgrim game coming out, but we're not got a Call of Duty type beat 'em up, you know? There's nothing that's absolutely massive that's overtaking the entire genre. Because of that, there's no safe environment to get accustomed to these controls before you go into the more competitive stuff. So what could fighting games do to make it so that people are more familiar with their old inputs? Well, do more. It sounds kind of stupid, but they could. Street Fighter tried this with the World Tour mode. Now, World Tour has a lot of problems from a bunch of different perspectives. However, one of the nice things it does is it does the Ultra Kill thing of letting you slowly add moves to your arsenal. You start with a basic fireball, then you get a DP, and then you go out into the world and you can learn other moves. And you can slowly add them to your character so that you can get used to the motions. It's not perfect. Mainly, it doesn't actually teach you how to execute the motions when it gives them to you. If you want to learn how to do motion inputs, you have to go to a side minigame that I don't even remember what it gives you, but I know it's there. But I think something expanded from these ideas would be interesting. I don't think every fighting game should have a World Tour mode. I think that's a little bit crazy. But a single-player mode that slowly gives you your character's main moves would be a good idea. Have, like, a Guilty Gear single-player mode that's like a roguelike, and you have to climb the Celestial Tower to get to Celestial, and you start at floor 1, and the only thing you have is one of 3 of your character's special moves. And every time you unlock a special move, you have to play like a little mini game. Maybe it's like drawing kanji, but you're doing the motion input, or a rhythm game where you have to do specific quarter circles in order to hit the beat. Once the player gets more used to these things and you've given them the simpler minigames, put them in situations where they have to use them. Maybe like when you get higher up on the floors, the opponents have specific downsides that you need to beat. So like, hey, this guy uses a mid-hitting fireball a lot. Maybe you should slide under it with this move. Hey, this guy's jumping a lot. Maybe you should press your anti-air in order to hit them. Hey, this guy's blocking like crazy and teching every throw. Throw out your command grab. Easing players into the motions and into where to use them, I think would go a long way for motion inputs. However, it may be too little too late. Let's be real, most people aren't buying fighting games for single-player modes. Most people are buying fighting games because they want to fight someone, generally one of their friends. It's a lot easier to sell these games if you have a simple input method for first-time users. It's why a bunch of different fighting games are doing it now. But I think these things should be stepping stones. What you want the players to do depends on how you, as a developer, want the game to play like. There's going to be developers out there who want to make simple input games and find innovative new ways to have a simple input method. Marvel Tokon seems to be taking a lot of notes out of a bunch of different Arc System Works games, but they have definitely innovated on some small things like having 3 assists on 1 button. 2XKO has designed its entire game around simple inputs, and seemingly is trying to find innovative ways to make them feel pretty good. If the developers are fine with tackling these challenges and finding new ways to put modern controls in their games, I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, but I still don't think it's inevitable. There's just some characters that seemingly wouldn't work with modern controls. Looking at Guilty Gear Strive, how would you do Gold Lewis with simple inputs? It doesn't really make sense. Modern controls have been on the rise, and there is a non-zero chance that every major fighting game that comes out has them. But not every fighting game is going to have them. There are going to be developers who decide they want to make motion input games first. And if you like motion inputs, I recommend drifting towards those games and showing your support. I love motion inputs, and I really don't want to see them go away. I hope developers try to find ways to ease players into these motions more naturally by actually tutorializing. That's basically the issue that's been going on with fighting games for years at this point. And there are definitely developers trying new and interesting things in the scene that I am very excited to see. That roguelike idea, I'm pretty sure that's just actually being made into a fighting game, so I'm really excited to see how that goes. So while modern inputs seem inevitable, I don't think motion inputs are necessarily going anywhere. And I think they could come back into the limelight if developers are willing to put in the effort to teach players how to do it. Who knows? Maybe we'll get some really interesting game modes out of it. Thank you for watching. I hope you all enjoyed. I'm at Versus Fighting, like, right now. I think when this comes out, like, what time is it? 6 o'clock? I think we'll be going to, like, the Jeopardy thing soon. I don't know. If you're at Versus Fighting, come say hi. I'll probably be around the Strive area. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you all next week for Lucy. Ooh! That's so stupid. Why did I make that sound?